Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and I had a subscriber ask a question which I'm going to flip in here for you guys, and he's kind of like, I know you've talked a lot about program hopping being a bad thing for athletes and people with performance-related goals, but what about the guys who are training for aesthetics? What should I tell them? Like, if I wanted to give them advice on why not to program hop, sell me on this idea. So let me put on my +5 hat of weaponsmithing, do a little bit of crafting, and let's talk about that. Now, I personally don't worry about that, but I don't mind giving advice on it, because I understand not everybody has that sexy bald aesthetic head like I do that all the bitches want to touch. And so instead, you want to focus upon your biceps and abs and a nice proportionate physique and a V-taper. I get that, because not everyone has those cranial aesthetics and that bald head. But you can't have that with a $1 shave club for $9 a month. Just throwing that out there. And I want to remind guys, we're going to jump into this in a second, but you need to remember, aesthetics of your physique is only going to get you so far with women. You really need to either have a fat bank account to go with that, or you need to be funny as fuck. So I'm going to recommend that you also spend some time working on making some extra money for a nice car and some nice clothes, or you invest in some joke books in addition to that. Because if you don't have money or a personality, no physique in the world is going to get you inside them sugar walls. But it is a nice icing on the cake. If you've got one of the other and you've got that as icing on the cake, you're probably in there. Now, if you have both of those others, you don't need to worry about it. You can get fat as fuck and be out of shape and it won't matter. You're going to get sugar walls all day long. If you got money and personality and you're just training for girls, no, man, spend less time in the gym and more time fucking. You don't need to waste time at the gym if you're funny and you have money. You don't need to worry about that working out to get girls at that point. You're good. All right, but that being said, aesthetics. All right, program hopping, honestly, here's where a lot of guys do a lot of program hopping, because they see a lot of serious bodybuilders who are always talking about changing things up. I've done countless videos on muscle confusion and why it works and doesn't work the way bodybuilders think it does. The thing you need to remember, bodybuilders are usually genetically gifted and on a lot of drugs. That's why they're aesthetic. Don't take their training advice. A lot of you guys are out there trying to do this natural, and I'm going to be blunt with you. It is more difficult to get an aesthetic physique without drugs. If you're choosing to stay completely clean, getting an impressive aesthetic physique is going to take you a lot of work. You're probably going to have to bust your fucking ass. That's just the reality of it. And you can't really afford to do stupid stuff if you're going to do that. And that's okay. Because as long as you avoid stupid stuff, you're going to be okay. You have to be willing to put in the work, though. The thing you need to remember, aesthetics, more than anything, is not so much about how big you are. A lot of guys who aren't that big, you guys see them on YouTube, you think they look big because of their proportions and the way that they look until you see them next to someone who's big, and then you realize, wow, that dude's small as fuck. I mean, Jeff Side's a perfect example. I have met Jeff Side. The dude is fucking tiny. But you wouldn't think that looking at him because of his proportions. Now, there's a large genetic component for that. But what you need to remember, aesthetics is going to be mostly about just getting good overall size, getting your body fat reasonably low. So diet and cardio are probably going to be the most important factors. Let's just be frank here. Diet and cardio are probably going to be the most important things you guys can do for your aesthetics. Learn to like riding a bike. Learn to like chicken breast and brown rice. That's just how it is. You better learn to like those things. If you want an aesthetic physique and you want to do it drug-free, you better learn to like cardio. You better learn to like bro foods. It's going to make your job a lot easier. It's gonna make your journey easier also if you learn to like those things. Now, that being said, your training, because outside of body fat, most of aesthetics is not really about size. What you guys are thinking of is that classic Greek statue physique. All right, it's not about mass. It's about having just enough mass but being proportionate. It's about certain muscles being well developed. It's about things like having wide shoulders, which means you need to have a wide back, a solid V taper, so you need good back development, wide delts, good size arms. but it's all about proportion. And probably the one muscle you probably can't have too big is a drug-free guy, is going to be your delts. All right, tons and tons of delt work. Tons of delt work, and a lot of overhead pressing will go really far for you. In fact, if I had to say what's probably the single most important lifts to do for a drug-free guy chasing aesthetics, fuckloads of overhead pressing. You're going to have to. You're going to have to if you're going to do this drug-free. That's just the reality. Delts, good delts are hard to build without drugs. You better learn to love the overhead press, and I mean tons of variations of it. Strict press, push press, everything. Get good at all of them. But the thing that you need to remember too is about weak point training. And to bring up a weak point, you're never going to bring up a weak point if you're continually changing exercises. If you're changing programs all the time, that means that you do not have a set progression. Progressive overload is the king of gaining size. All right, progressive overload is everything. That is the primary determiner of your muscle growth. If you're program hopping all the time, changing set and rep schemes where you're not tracking everything from week to week, program to program, and you do not have a set progress plan to make sure that you continually get better at certain exercises, you have no way to ensure that your weak points are going to grow. A lot of guys are going to say, well, I come in and just train them to fatigue. I train to failure. If I train a muscle to failure, I must be stimulating growth, right? No. No, you're not. Meaning, if you've hit failure with the same weight 3 different times, the law of adaptation has caught you. If you haven't gained a rep anywhere in those 3 times, you failed on the 10th rep every single time 3 times in a row, that muscle's not growing anymore from reaching failure. You require progressive overload. You either have to be able to add weight or add reps using the same range of motion and technique on an exercise to ensure growth. Proper training programming ensures that over time you progress, because without that progress, muscles stall and stop growing. If you're changing programs all the time, you have no control over ensuring that you're progressing. There's a reason periodization and things are used. There's a reason linear periodization is used. There's a reason concurrent style, like conjugate style training is used by the top coaches out there, because you're programming to get you past stalls. You're programming in a way to make sure that you're changing the program appropriately 1 week before you stall every time. All right, a well-written program is set up to where certain changes are made a week before you're going to stall, because a good training programmer knows how stalls work in the system, and they account for it ahead of time to get you through them by changing energy systems, changing the training pattern in such a way to get you a different training element, a performance element, moving along again. And here's the problem. If you're changing exercises too often, what do you think's happening? You're changing that too often, you're resetting motor patterns and you're losing progression, because here's how it works. If you want to put as much tension as possible on a muscle, let's say you're doing the bench press for your chest and triceps. That exercise builds both muscles. If you bench press correctly, it builds your chest and your triceps. Hey, those are important muscles for aesthetics. Or you know what, I don't care. How about incline bench? We can do that instead. Doesn't matter, pick one. You're doing that exercise and you're trying to progress on it. The first few sessions of doing an exercise, you're training motor patterns. You're training a lot of motor patterns. Yeah, you might reach muscle failure, you might reach fatigue from training, but you're not moving the maximum amount of weight for those reps you could be moving. Why? Because your motor pattern's suck at an exercise. You're new to doing it. You don't have the pattern down. Therefore, you're not as strong at it. If you're not as strong at it, you're not able to maximize muscle fiber recruitment doing the exercise. You're growing less from it, right? Meaning, if you're at a certain size already and you're able to do 10 reps with 250 instead of 10 reps at 225, the 250 will stimulate more growth on that exercise using the same range of motion and same pattern. Hopefully you guys follow me so far there. You're putting more tension on the muscle. It's stimulating more growth if you were at the same size doing the same weight. When you first start doing an exercise, you're weaker at it until you learn the motor patterns. Once you learn the motor patterns, you're now stronger at it. Your nervous system is more efficient at it. By being more efficient, it recruits more muscle fibers. All right, it's hard. You got to do more work to reach failure. You have to do more work to reach fatigue now. But by doing more work, you're recruiting more total muscle fibers. You're inducing more metabolic fatigue. You're recruiting more upper threshold fibers. You're stimulating more growth. So if you continue to get stronger and stronger on the same exercise with a training system guaranteed to make you stronger on your bench press or your incline bench press or your incline dumbbell curl, a good program will make you stronger on that exercise because it's programmed around getting you through sticking points. Any good program should have that accounted for already when it's written. And if it doesn't, you need to go get a program that does. Like the coach who wrote it sucks. If it's something you pulled out of a bodybuilding magazine, it probably sucks. If you get stronger at that exercise, you're going to be more efficient at recruiting muscle fibers doing it. More overload, more growth. If you're changing exercises too often, what happens? You're spending a whole training session or two with the new exercise, learning a new motor pattern, recruiting less muscle fibers. And you're like, but I went to failure. I must have recruited everything. No, not necessarily. Had you been stronger and had the motor pattern down, you would have been able to recruit more muscle fibers on that exercise the way you're doing it. So every time you just change exercises, you're recreating a new stall. You just created a new training session in which you stimulated less total muscle growth by changing exercises. And it probably takes up to 3 sessions to really get the motor pattern down to really maximize muscle fiber recruitment on any exercise, particularly a multi-joint exercise, like not just a curl, but something like a bench press or an incline bench or an overhead press or a lat pull down or a barbell row. Those are all solid mass builders. It takes several training sessions to get the motor pattern down and the bar path down to where you can be efficient at recruiting muscle fibers on that exercise. So if you're changing those things too often and you're randomly changing stuff, what happens? You're creating small mini stalls in your growth all the way along. Now, if you have lagging muscle groups that you need to bring up to achieve aesthetics, because aesthetics, remember, is all about proportion and leanness. That's it. That's what gives you guys aesthetics. And it's got to be based around your individual bone structure, because the muscle proportions or growth that might make someone like me look aesthetic is not going to be the one that's going to make you look aesthetic. We have different structures. That's why aesthetics is kind of annoying. That's why I don't like it, because I'm not very artistic. But you have to recognize that difference there. And if you're sitting there trying to bring up lagging body parts and you're changing stuff too much, you're creating mini stalls in those lagging body parts. The best thing that you could possibly do would be to pick a program that focuses very heavy on progression and gets you really, really strong on a couple of different exercises for your weakest body parts aesthetically. And if you do that with a consistent, solid program and run it out for 12 weeks or 6 months, to where you get incredibly strong on the exercises that bring up your lagging body parts. Let's say, for example, your worst lagging body parts are your delts and your triceps. And you get on a program that makes you incredibly strong at the push press and then maybe side laterals. All right, you get on a program to get you brutally strong on both of those, because it's a well-written, long program that accounts for the next 6 months to ensure that you don't stall on those exercises, meaning it programs and periodizes around the fact that you're going to progress on those, and you put a great deal of focus into getting really, really good at those 2 exercises. You're unlikely 6 months later to still have those as weak points, because you got so strong and efficient at recruiting muscle fibers on a couple of exercises that really hammer home your weak points. Those weak points are going to go away, and you're going to be more aesthetic. Or you're going to be more aesthetic when you trim a little bit of extra body fat down, because you might have had to eat a little more to get those things to grow, then you diet a little bit. You're going to be more proportionate now as a result of it. So the thing to remember is that program hopping, particularly when you guys are chasing aesthetics and you're trying to get balance and proportion is hard to get. It really isn't that easy to get unless you're just very genetically gifted. And if you're program hopping and you don't have a plan in place to make sure that you get really strong and really good at performing the exercises that are going to bring up your weak points, you could actually end up less aesthetic 6 months into your training than when you started, if your goal was aesthetics, because you could end up messing up your proportions even worse, because you're doing random stuff. You're changing things too often, and you end up sometimes your dominant body parts, the things that are growing too fast for you to be aesthetic, end up getting the best results every time you program hop and you're just changing exercises, because they grow easier for you personally. And since they grow easier, you don't have to have as smart of training for those body parts. So when you're just changing things up, you oftentimes will find that you become less proportionate. Your proportions can actually get worse as a result of program hopping for you guys who are chasing those proportions. And if you run a solid, consistent program to where you can definitely put extra focus, and what I mean by focus, I don't mean extra exercises. I mean focus on getting really, really good at the best exercises to bring up your weak points. And a consistent program should allow you to do that. And that's what's going to give you what you're looking for. Because again, for guys who are trying to do it drug-free, to be really aesthetic, it's all about proportion and leanness. It's not just about chasing size. They're two totally different animals. And that's the best way for you guys to do that. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.